Good afternoon and welcome to the Baptism Screening and Talkback. I am Cam Argetsinger with the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, and our program today is co-presented by Lincoln Center. We are so happy to have been partnering with them throughout this entire process, and they are the ones who commissioned this work. So we truly hope you enjoy it. Also, a huge thank you to PNC, who is sponsoring the National Center for Civil and Human Rights Black History Programming this month. So thank you, PNC, and thank you, Lincoln Center, for partnering with us in this project. And just a quick friendly disclaimer, all comments of the moderators and guests of our programs represent the thoughts of each individual and do not necessarily represent an official position of the National Center for Civil and Human Rights. And it is my great honor to introduce you today, Ellen McGirt. Ellen is a senior editor at Fortune, where she established Race and the Culture Beat back in 2016. In addition to long-form magazine features, she writes Race Ahead, a regular column on race and inclusion to incorporate life and beyond. The column has received a New York Press Club Award for commentary, a National Headliner Award, and the Stephen Heller Prize for commentary from the AIGA. And with that, Ellen, welcome. Ellen, welcome, I'm sorry.
It's so good to be here. Can you hear me and see me okay?
You sound good and you look good.
That's all I needed to hear. And thank you so much for that warm welcome. And thank you for everyone for being here. I am not the star today. We are in for a treat for your senses and your soul. We are about to watch The Baptism, the new iteration of the visual poem inspired by the legacies of civil rights leaders John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, created by award-winning poet and artist Carl Hancock Rux, who is here with us today, and we're going to meet him later. Directed by visual artist Carrie Mae Weems, now featuring a brand new score by Grammy nominee Michelle Ndegeocello. Pardon me. This version of the visual poem was released by Lincoln Center for the Performing Arts earlier this month, as Cam mentioned. And one of the clear blessings of this troubled time is that we get to watch it together. This is the gift from the National Center for Civil and Human Rights, PNTWC as well, who have thrown this party, but also to all of you who are checking in today. You're going to hear Carl share rhetoric that meets that of his two inspirations, and a deeply reassuring context that we need more than ever, that death is another stage of life, the truth about the flowers that bloom in the spring, and that when conditions are sufficient, things will manifest. When they are not, things withdraw. And we never die, we transition, grace upon grace upon grace. This moment and this film and this artwork reminds us of the work civil rights has always been about being together, being reborn in community, building bridges and bearing witness to the hard, the soft, the real, the true, the work. In this time when we have been physically disconnected for so long and spiritually disconnected for even longer, taking these few minutes to be immersed in an art piece that reflects the collaborative essence of this moment feels like food for the soul. So everyone out there, just put everything on pause and let it all flow through you. When we get back, we can talk to Carl about anything that's on his mind and also yours. Enjoy.
The farmer knows Death is another stage of life. Nothing really dies. We transition, like japonica, like quince. The bush blossoms in spring, but some winters buds early with a cold frost. New buds of japonica manifest another generation of flowers. There is a great parable where one asks the japonica flowers, "Are you the same flowers that died in the frost? Or are you different flowers?" And the flowers reply, "We are not the same, and we are not different. When conditions are sufficient, we manifest. And when conditions are not, we go into hiding." It is as simple and it is as complicated as that. When conditions are sufficient, things manifest. When conditions are no longer sufficient, things withdraw. They wait until the moment is right to manifest again. We do not die. We are always becoming. We become air and molecules. As soon as blood circulation and respiration stops, excess carbon dioxide causes an acidic environment, causing membranes in cells to rupture. The membranes release enzymes that begin to nourish themselves on nutrient-rich cells. And these nourished enzymes become many gases of sulfur-containing compounds, and bacteria return to the earth. The microorganisms and bacteria produce an olfactory sense as organ, as muscle, as skin, liquefied, as protest. With all the body's soft tissue decomposes, we become byproducts of our earlier form. We are never born, we never die, we transition. The day of nourishing is here, the lifeblood of transition. One city to the next city, story upon story, house upon house, our wanting always cleaning the air, nourishing the soil of insistence. Every being is a building with music. Grace upon grace upon grace. And now both hands baptized in blood. The sharecropper's son, the boy from Boonville. The first shall go, last shall come. Age comes, the body withers. Truth comes as itself, a dissembling of the thing, an entity of narrow precincts. Truth opens among ventured things, of blood, imperfect light, excluding loneliness, finding company. Tenant farmers know about hands in soil and water on earth, know the lifespan of crops and what ice herds hanging over an attic window means to the sky and all its balconies, vis-a-vis a higher place, a terrace, another room above, taking form, catching hold of the torch glow. I am not me, I am watching me, realized as two tall shadows sinking into the hardened earth. Not even the slightest trace of blue dust will tell of the descent of man. Our hours pass into the dim light of half-eaten moons, so long a journey, yet brief. After due time, we return again, if we nurture that which we have planted with great concentration, as a witness opposing honor. Farmers know the moisture of a night coat, quilted wet against translucent soil, the constant swelling of hands and feet, followed by complete consciousness. Planters, planting, plant. Builders build, build. Take a knee and baptize, imploring succor from the breast of God for a voice, a tongue, a language, a means of articulation. This soil, this civility, this right of man must be guarded until we die and are birthed again. This proclamation belongs to our walking and our wondering. Walk, walker, walk. Sing, singers, sing. Even when the roads are bad and the bridges are blocked and the city's gates locked against us, be quick with your questions and slow with your answers as you approach the tilling of this field. You are its caretaker, inheriting an old Masonic hymn of migrants who compel thoughts. Fear not jail, nor knife, nor noose, because we are not alone in this music. It is an andantino, sung with four wind instruments and blues. It is a flute, an oboe, a horn, a bassoon, all manner of stringed instruments coming from within our throats and the sound we produce. Cavatina for the mother of the dead lost to a mirror, cloaked in darkness and impenetrable misery. This is the nature of baptism. A thank you of water in coming and with company, with the web of reason entangled to it. Nothing can be wasted. Artistic, cultural, and personal relationships to urbanity and regenerative architecture fosters intellectual, human, and financial capital in restoring and replenishing resources of a historical past, a sustainable present, and a wellspring of future opportunities. Think of these two men as one building. No building is wasted. Regenerative design thinks ahead, where architects must design the future, reverse the damage, and create a net positive impact on the environment at the macro scale of sight. Let the storm water run off the roof of your house and make your house stand beneath the ceiling of our responsibility, a place for permanent dreamers, a crop field for tenant farmers, tenants of their own land and winds. Remember them well, because they are over and over and never die. Almost clear now. Storm winds resolving its fury, sheer stocking of light coming through the floodgates. 2 strokes of copper arching over day spring, almost clear now. Keep on, clouds braiding over the moss basin, shaping the valley, glistening its illusions, everything washed clean, soon, even the soot-stained air. Keep on, keep on, keep on, keep on, keep on, keep on, keep on.
It's the third time I've seen it, and I managed to mostly get through it without weeping. But I was hoping that Carl could unmute and join, and we can talk about this amazing work. There he is in his artist lair. How are you?
I'm good. Am I unmuted? Hopefully I am.
You are unmuted. You are larger than life. You are beautiful. And welcome. Congratulations on this extraordinary achievement. And I want to ask you a million questions, but I won't. I want to just, before we begin, just touch on some of your extraordinary career. And I know that you are often called a multi-hyphenate of multi-hyphenates. And it's just hard to imagine how much you've accomplished in a short life as a poet, playwright, novelist, essayist, actor, director, singer, songwriter. Your literary Village Voice literary prize-winning pagan operetta, your novel Asphalt, your Obie Award-winning play Talk, 4 CDs. You collaborate in dance, theater, and film, and you can see just this who's who of luminaries that you've worked with. Just some of the it's a beautiful thing to think about a world that recognizes this level of accomplishment and work, and finds ways that you can all collaborate together. So meeting you makes me feel very good about you and the world. So congratulations on all of that. And thank you so much for making the time to be here.
Absolutely.
Before we dig into this work, I thought it would be smart just to check in with you and see just how are you doing. You know, we're in the middle of this pandemic that operates on so many levels, and just how has it affected you, and how has it affected your work?
I'm surviving, like I think most Americans are trying to do. Certainly, there are degrees of feeling loneliness or degrees of feeling isolated, cut off from your own community, cut off from the people who create your family and your social system, as well as your proactive system. Yeah.
Right.
But I've learned that there's a way to be connected to people without being in their physical space. And, that is simply just about concentrating on them and talking to them and doing what we're doing right now, or having phone conversations, or having Zoom meetings, or emailing, or writing. I have to be honest. I think of this moment in my life as a gift. I know what the pandemic has meant to a lot of people. I know that there are many people who have been lost, and it's a very painful thing to think about. And I certainly feel like I owe some responsibility to the people who have lost others and who are losing others and who will lose others, to make this a productive moment in my life.
That makes a lot of sense. I'm moved by the idea that it's a productivity that's not just born out of trauma, but born out of the need to connect.
That's right. And it's not the first time that I've experienced in my lifetime. I mean, I was very young when I came of age during an AIDS crisis, and lost my brother. And I remember the fear. I remember, the social constructs that were created around, that disease. I remember how people were treating people. And then I remember having to become an advocate for my brother, and having to understand something about hospitals, and having to understand something about the hospital system, and having to understand something about the social system, and having to understand something about the homeless system, and having to understand who was available to help me help him. And so this is not it's not the first time that in my lifetime that I've experienced this. There's a woman who I count as a great mentor, and I have many, but there's a great mentor of mine, Lori Carlos, who's no longer with us physically. She was the one of the original members of the Color Girls, and Ntozake Shange's The Color Girls, yes? And she was just around the time that Trump was voted in. She was in the hospital dying of cancer. And she was, as one is, going through all the pains and things and the drugs that your body is that's wreaking havoc on your body at that time. She somehow managed to call me, which is really crazy. And she was a little, one might say, hallucinatory in a way. One might think that she was hallucinatory, but actually she was quite lucid. She was clear. And she called me. I picked up the phone and I said, "Hey, hi, Lori." And she said, and she, is without knowing or without having had the discussion, it's almost as if she knew that I had become a little obsessed with what was happening in this country, what was happening on CNN, watching the news constantly. And she just said, all these faces, all these faces, all these faces, they've been here before. They've been here. I saw them in my time. They've been here. They've said these things. They've done these things. And people have died and died and died and died. Do your work, Carl. Do your work. And she died. And that was one of the greatest moments that I can remember about the beginning of this administration for me, that I would be able to withstand it and understand it from a different perspective, not being a victim, but actually being an activist.
And we should talk more about that context here, but I do want to ask you about the baptism and how you came to be inspired by specific elements of John, and I'm wearing my t-shirt today, my John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, and how you made the choices that you did to weave them into this work. That story that you just told about Lori is clearly referenced in this piece, in the seasons, in the manifesting, in the withdrawing, and that the flowers are not the same. We are something different. This is part of the journey that we're on. So could you just talk a little bit about how you put this together?
When Lincoln Center asked me to write a poem in tribute to John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, the first feeling, of course, I've had was honor. I felt honored to be asked. And then I accepted that challenge, and then I thought about it very carefully. What is it to write a poem about these two men? I like to think about the DNA of people. I like to think about their lifespans and what they experienced, what they said, what they did. But I know that a poem is not a biography. A poem is not that. A poem actually reaches at something else. It reaches at the core of their humanity and their spirituality, if you can do that. And so that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to reach toward the spirituality and humanity of these two men. I thought about John Lewis as a farmer's son. It's something he talked about endlessly. And I looked at all those photographs of him, 23 years old, in his overalls. A young man from the South who had not been to college necessarily. Who had not been around politicians, who had not been around intellectual speakers, but knew that this was a moment of social justice that he needed to belong to and that he needed to be at the forefront of. I thought about C.T. Vivian as well, and there's a book about him and about how his mother decided when he was born, or when he was very young in Boonesville, that she was going to remove him from where he was, that they would leave. This is during that time of the Great Migration, when many African Americans were leaving the South, and they would relocate to Chicago. And I thought, that's amazing. She rescued her son because she knew that he would not survive in the environment in which he was born. But if she transplanted him, perhaps he might have a chance. Somehow all of those thoughts, one thought leads to another, all of those thoughts connected me to the earth, connected me to flowers, connected me to architecture, connected me to how we plant and how we build. So that's really what I did.
And what was it like collaborating with Carrie May, who I believe is a friend of yours?
Carrie's a wonderful friend of mine. We've been working together forever, and I love her to death. And it's easy when you're working with someone who you love and who you respect and who you revere in such a great way. I was asked by Lincoln Center to write this poem, and that was actually the only invite that I had from Lincoln Center first. And then I had a thought, which was, let's do something more than me writing a poem and giving it to you on paper or whatever. Why don't we film this? Why don't we make this sort of an artistic project? And they were like, yes. And so I was like, okay, can I call Carrie Mae Weems? And they were like, yes. And then I was like, they were like, I was like, yes, I think she was. So I called Carrie, and she said yes, without hesitation, without really knowing, without having to be coaxed or primed. I mean, she just said yes, and it was as simple as that and as easy as that. And so we went into the theater that I'm a co-artistic director of, Nabu Mines, with my sound team and her lighting team and her film team. I had written my text. She had plotted out what she wanted already, where I was going to be. And I recited the work at that table in one room. And then she also brought sets with her. And so she brought some of her photography and things to used another one of our rooms, which is like the white room, and decided that after we'd done about 17 takes in the black room, that we were going to do a few more takes in the white room. And then somehow she would intersperse these or do something with it. I didn't know what she was going to do with the work when she went away, but when I saw it, I was dumbfounded, as I constantly am, by her work and by her imagination and by what I know she understands. So it was an easy process, but it was also the process that I expected.
Well, I tell you, this is how, now we know, this is how multi-hyphenates operate. They're, you're open, curious, kind, generous, and you jump right in. That gets you everywhere you need to go.
That's right. You jump right in, and you try hard to jump right in armed, educated. You try to jump right in, with something to say. The problem, I think, with some people is that they jump right in, and we know this through social media. They jump right into a conversation, and they have no information about the history of a thing, and they wind up saying things that offend people and hurt people, and they wind up doing things that offend people and hurt people, or they jump right into positions, even political positions, like the president that we just had. I will say that.
Say whatever you want.
That's right. You jump right into it. You jump right into a job thinking anybody can do this. I can do this. I'll just bring my sons and my daughters. We don't need any training. We don't really need to have spent any amount of time in policy and public policy, and really we don't need to have talked to everybody to understand what the country needs. We'll just jump right in, and we'll just do it. And then you realize, well, what? Jumping right in is not just the thing that you should do. It's what you can do. But jumping right in, armed, ready, educated, having thought about it carefully, having meditated, that's what you should do.
So we should draw a line, at least I'd love to hear the line that you draw between the work of the original civil rights leaders, specifically John Lewis and C.T. Vivian, to today. And I think it's easy to make the mistake that people are just jumping right in and putting up some signs, and then suddenly Georgia's turns blue. We have Black Lives Matter. Obviously, we have remarkable organizations working for voter access and rights. Now we have almost a global conversation about equity in policing and beyond. How do you see the through line from the 60s to today, and what strikes you as being special and new this time around?
Well, one of the things you said is that it's a global movement. It's that it's a global civil rights movement. I think for the first time in history, there are people in other countries, a huge amount of people in other countries that have actually participated in this movement and decided to take to the streets and to raise their voices. But I don't know that I think that the movements are absolutely different. And what I mean by that, other than the globalization of it, and what I mean by that is that they both come with decades and decades and decades of oppression. You know, I mean, the uprise. I think that's how uprising happens. You know, I think that when you've dealt with something for so long, and your humanity has been stripped away for so long, and even if you stood by and watched the humanity of others stripped away for so long, and you see the names mounting up and mounting up of people who are being killed, black and brown bodies, for so long, you can't do anything else except begin to try to coalesce with somebody else, or try to join a movement. And I think that's what John Lewis did. I think that's what the SNCC organization did. I think that's what a lot of the ministers and the young people and the gospel singers and the activists of the 1960s did. You know, I think that they had an idea. I think they had a mission. I think they got together. I know that they did not completely agree with each other all the time, but what they did agree with each other about was that they needed to be a force that moved the world in another direction. So I see this as one of those moments, a moment in response to atrocity, years and years and years of atrocity.
I want to ask about resilience in a second, because I walk that fine line between understanding the context and the history, and it's been like this before, it will be like this again, and wanting it to end somehow. So I bookmark that. But one of the things I wanted to ask you about was the changing nature of leadership in the modern civil rights movement. I think I know that your dad fought in World War II in the segregated army, was even honored and earned recognition. My father did too, did not earn recognition, but you know, he's a product of the Great Migration from a small town in South Carolina, fought in World War II, and the segregated army, came home, couldn't vote. You know, all of those stories live in my DNA. I grew up in Harlem. He worked for the Children's Aid Society. So these were the conversations that were happening in our living room, but they were men leading the conversations, all of them. Mm. And this time around, you know, there's women and LGBTQ citizens marching in the streets, and a variety of voices and a new way of organizing leadership that doesn't always match the kinds of soaring rhetoric that you found in the church. I know that C.T. Vivian was a Baptist minister, and so much of the organizing happened there. What do you make of that shift? And do you think that this is something that that we can build on, that this is a new moment?
I mean, well, one of the things I can say is that regardless of the misogyny and regardless of the homophobia that existed in those movements, even in the 1960s, because it did exist, and we are very clear about that, the movement, the struggle would not have happened without the tremendous efforts of some amazing women, and it wouldn't have happened without the efforts of some amazing people who might be considered LGBTQIA. And so, you know, from Bayard Rustin and on. I mean, so we do know that these people did participate and were really strong in that movement. But of course, they were relegated to the back. You know, they were not. You know, James Baldwin. I mean, even not being relegated to the back, because you can't really relegate James Baldwin to the back of any place or any room or any time or any period. You know, but it's they were part of that community as well, and always have been, and always will be. because they were also experiencing the same injustices. So regardless of the inequities, I think that we were experiencing during that time, which is to make the civil rights movement a male-dominated movement that really didn't give women the opportunity to speak much or to plan much or didn't give them the credit that they deserved for the work that they were doing, or just simply asked them to be secretaries or whatever, or the people who were asked to participate but just stand in the back somewhere like Bayard Rustin was because he was gay. Yeah. Except but we do know that he was so instrumental in being a modus operandi for Martin Luther King, and we know that he pretty much spearheaded that movement in so many ways, and just did it without the recognition that other people, other men received. My father, like your father, you're right. My father fought in World War II, and this is my adoptive father. And the gift that I think I have from having been adopted by this man is that he was born in 1915, and his wife was born in 1923.
Mm.
They were both born and raised in Harlem, and so they never had children. So when they adopted me, they were already older people. They were middle-aged people, and who had no thoughts necessarily of raising a child. And what happened for the rest of those years was, it was a learning curve, a learning opportunity for both of us. He couldn't help but talk to me. He finally had someone, a little boy that he could talk to about the war. And we had one of the worst jobs that you can imagine in World War II. He was a runner. I don't know what the formal word is, but I know that basically when people were shot or killed in the battlefield, they would, because there was segregation during World War II, his job, what they would do is they would send the Negroes, excuse me for using that word, but that's what he would, they would send the Negroes out to collect the bodies or the people who had been named without arms and bring them back and retrieve them, back to the front. So imagine that this is your job during the war. In France, he did this. In Japan, he did this. I mean, on and on. In Algeria, he did this. He did this all over. I mean, they couldn't help but give him a medal for all the lives that he had saved because he, had done a job that nobody wants and survived it and still and done it without the credit that he certainly deserved for doing it. My mother, I think, reminded me that there have always been civil rights movements, and that they should all be considered civil rights movements. That Harriet Tubman Harriet Tubman returning, escaping and returning to the South and, trying to bring people with her to the North itself was a civil rights movement,
Right.
A constant movement. That these things, have been going on and on and on for a long time. That John Brown, who was white, right, was engaged in that movement, though we didn't call it the civil rights movement. So I think that we're in another iteration of these movements, and we really have to study them and look back at them and understand them to know that we belong to a lineage of resistance and change.
So it's so interesting that you say that, and it probably leads nicely to my resilience question, is that especially in my beat, which is inclusion and race and anti-racism at a systemic level, whether it's in government, or whether it's in corporate systems or education systems or military systems. I spend a lot of time on that, and my readers really feel that they are part of something. And I suppose that they feel that they're part of a civil rights movement. But one of the things that we do talk about is whatever room you're in, your executive suite, your board, your LinkedIn, when you think about the products on your store shelves, whatever metaphorical room you're in, your job as an anti-racist, as a person who's going to be part of something better, is to notice who's not there and then ask why. And the why is, to your point, is where you understand what the work that needs to be done lies. You can't just jump ahead.
Well,
Does that make sense?
that makes sense. I mean, I think if you notice who's not there, then you notice who's not ready, and you notice who's also afraid,
Yeah.
and you notice who might not be on your side, or might not be on the side of the civil liberties that you want to enact. So some of those people need to remain not there if they're going to hinder it. There's that great old Christian song, right? Don't if you're gonna, don't hinder me, right? Don't hinder me. Whatever you do, whatever your decision is, just don't hinder me because I've got a journey, I've got a job to do, I've got a path to walk, I've got a place to go, I've got a call to answer to, and if you don't want to do it, you don't have to do it, but do not hinder me. So I think that we'll always live in societies where there were people who are not there and can't show up for those jobs. But you know what? That's okay. The people who are supposed to are there and can do enormous, as we know, enormous things in enormous times.
So I'm going to keep an eye on the comments here to get some questions in. And while I do that, I want to talk about an iconic image that came from John Lewis late in his life that I did not see coming, and it has become a touchstone for me. And I even with my family, with my colleagues, when we're having a hard day, we do it. And it's like the John Lewis thing. Like all of a sudden, it's like in addition to this image, it's like, and the look on his face and his little leg would go out. And like, no matter how hard our day is, we're just like, we do the little John Lewis shuffle over the Zoom. And it's like, yes, Black joy. I was wondering, can you talk a little bit about Black joy and the role you think it plays in this movement?
Well, thank you for asking that, because I think that we have to have some level of joy, Black joy, LGBTQIA joy, the oppression joy. We have to have a moment. We have to have moments where we're able to sing and we're able to dance and we're able to feel each other. There's a physical something that happens to us and a spiritual something that happens to us when we actually are experiencing joy, even in times of sorrow. And so I think that we become even more energized. And so it's it's not a joy that says I'm so joyful that
Right.
I'm afraid of the struggle to come, but it's a joy that says I'm ready for this movement and I'm okay, and I'm okay even dying today if I have to die today, and I'll die today laughing. I'll die today not laughing at this moment, or not dying. I will not die today laughing at the fact that perhaps maybe we might not win this fight. But I will die today with joy, knowing that I was on the right side of humanity. And so that's very important. And my friends who are, may or may not even consider themselves activists, but certainly are incredible artists, and many of them activists, have brought me so much joy throughout all of this. And we all need that. We all need to just laugh, smile, and get together and know that we're going to be all right and keep going.
I know, it's the humanizing moment, and also just to be happy in our bodies. Hortense Noble has a lovely comment here that she's enjoying listening and seeing the photos. And why am I tearing up? Why? And, I actually had to watch this several times to make sure I wouldn't come out of it sobbing. And I'm not sure I can name the feelings either. And since you made it and collaborated on it, and you had to weave those feelings and emotions into the piece, maybe you could help us understand what we may be feeling as we were listening to your words and watching you and watching the images. What primal stuff might have been coming up for us?
When I filmed the baptism, my intention was that it would just be a poem and that I would recite it and we would send everybody home. I teared up too, and which is caught on camera. I teared up too. And the moment that I teared up was after I'd read the piece, and Carrie had not heard the piece. She came ready to do the job, but she had not heard the text. And after I'd read the work, I figured she'd say cut, and that we'd keep going. And she decided to lead me on this impromptu interview, and she just asked me from off camera, "What is your connection, Carl, to civil rights? What is your connection to John Lewis? What is your connection to C.T. Vivian?" And I began to talk about my brother. I began to talk about that moment, during the AIDS crisis. I began to talk about um, watching my brother's body wither and die in a hospital bed, um, with no attendance, no attendance,
Yeah.
because they, because people were afraid of the disease that was ravaging into his body, and the people who were just not interested really, because of the stigma, that belonged to the disease that was ravaging his body. And I decided in those moments that I wouldn't allow myself to be afraid of the disease or afraid of the stigma or afraid of any of it, because all I knew as a young man was I love my brother, and I'm going to help my brother either live or I'm going to bury him with dignity. And so, and that's what I did. And so the tears that welled up in me were actually memories. It was memories of of the wellspring of what this all comes from, right? The wellspring of and even if it's not someone in the family, the wellspring of watching the news nightly and seeing that someone else was shot today, and there was another kid who was shot today, and there was another child who was shot by the police, and there was another man who was shot, and there was another woman who was shot, and there was another woman who was shot by the police, and the police got off, and the police got off, and the police got off, and the police got off. And and you try to keep going, you try to keep going, and you meet your friends for dinner, and you meet your friends to go to the movies, and you try to live your life, and another child gets shot and gets shot and gets shot. And at some point you just really almost break down to the point. You break down to the point of saying, I've had enough. I've had enough. So I think that the tears people experience when they experience baptism, they are experiencing the collective emotional response that they've always had long before I wrote this poem to an uneven universe.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah. The truth rings the bell. It really does. It really does rock you. I have someone tracked me down on Twitter who's watching with a direct message. Very, very clever. And the question is about white allies. And you've talked a little bit about this earlier, about being ready for the work, about making sure that you're not hindering anybody else. But to their point, privately, the truth is we do need people to work together. Like just sort of my early remarks about the hard, the soft, the ugly, the true, trying to do this together. And everything is more connected. We can see and hear and touch each other constantly through social media, good and bad. And we have everybody's attention now. Sometimes that's a good thing, sometimes we don't. The riot on January 6th made it pretty clear that there's some hard divisions right now. What is your best advice for anybody who's struggling to stay connected to the movement if it's not their natural language? And what is your best advice for people on the flip side to better help, not accommodate, I'm searching for the right word, but to better create connections with people who are new, particularly if they're white or otherwise majority culture?
I think that we always have to recognize that no man is an island, that no man exists by himself, that no man experiences the world or life or death by himself, that we are all human, and we all come into this world, we live, and we have a certain amount of time to be here, and then we're gone. If we can just tap into that,
Yeah.
then we are beginning to tap into community, and we are beginning to tap into our allies and trying to find out who our allies are. Our allies are other people, and then of course it gets more complicated. Of course, it gets into as you said, it gets more complicated. What are your thoughts? What are my thoughts? Nobody has nobody nobody no. There's no single person who believes we should be free. I mean, there's a whole bunch of people who believe that we should be free. There's no single person who believes that they would like to oppress the rest, right? I mean, there's a bunch of people who would like to oppress the rest. So you find your community. You have to find your community, and even without preparation. And again, being reminded of John Lewis, my greatest image of John Lewis, is this man in his overalls. I mean, I see that almost as if I mean, because there he is on the March on Washington or all these places, and he's not suited up in
Right.
like like all the other people. He's this 23. That's the other thing. That he was a 23-year-old man who spoke to thousands of people at the March on Washington. So I don't even know if he knew if he was ready to say what he had to say. I know that he had the opinion that he had, but how frightening must that have been to have been? I know when I was 23, in fact, I'll tell you quite honestly, when I was 22 or 23, the first time I had to do public speaking in school or something, I think I fainted.
Yeah.
Because it was just like a class of about 10 people. But to have done it in front of thousands of people, you stand up for your job, you stand up for this moment, and you realize that out there are people who are on your side, and that this moment in history has to be on your side, and that something greater is also on your side as well. So you don't have to have the language. You just have to join the movement and the struggle.
That's inspiring. And I knew from watching the documentary that his sisters were super surprised to see him speaking in front of all those people, his older sisters.
Some of the greatest activists are people who, their families would never have thought, that they would be on the forefront or on the front line. Another one of my mentors, Dr. Bernice Johnson Regan, always says that when she was a part of the Freedom Singers, she remembered that the sheriff and all these white police officers had burst into a church meeting because they wanted to arrest the people in that meeting who they thought were stirring up trouble, the insurgents in a way. And the church continued to have their service. They continued to sing their songs. And they didn't move and they didn't budge and they didn't allow fear to create havoc. They stayed where they were and they sang. And she says that at that moment, she had never heard her voice before. She'd been a singer, but she had never truly heard her voice the way it sounded that day in opposition, to something that was about to really threaten her life and the life of her family. And that voice is a voice that she continued through for the rest of her life, to become an anthropologist, to become an activist, to stand up and be counted even from a young teenager, and to figure it out. So we all have this ability.
That is amazing. Davin Larson has a wonderful question that I've been dying to ask you too, that you are clearly a multi-hyphenate artist, but do you gravitate to one genre particularly, or do your creative works usually just lean to interdisciplinary works and you go where you go?
Well, I mean, I consider myself to be a writer, and I think that I take what being a writer means to me into every other art form that I express. Right. So I think I'm a writer first, even when I sing. I'm a writer first when I'm writing poetry. I'm a writer first, even when I'm acting. I'm a writer first when I'm directing. I'm a writer first, when I'm being an activist in a way. I mean, I really think about words on the page, and I really think about the words on the page as my thoughts, and my understanding of the thing, and how I can begin to argue with what I understand or don't understand of a thing. I actually really used to hate being a public speaker or being someone who would be asked to speak impromptu, because I used to think, that I wasn't a very good public speaker at all. And that's probably, I should say, a little bit of that came from the fact that I stuttered a little bit as a kid, and also that I had a deep voice when I was very young. Even when I was 11, the kids used to make fun of me. So there was always this. When I was 11 years old, there was always this thing.
This booming voice coming out of his little kid.
Right. There's always this thing called his voice, and so I used to just be quiet. I was quiet because I didn't want anybody to laugh at me. And then, but my real relationship became to the words that I was able to put down on paper for myself, and so I approach everything that I do as a writer.
Well, and it's just such a beautiful image of like thinking about you inside your head, making the case, making the argument, refining what you want to say. It's such I'm an introvert. It's such an introvert's way of processing. And then it doesn't necessarily come out fully formed, but it comes out better than the mess in your head.
That's right. That's right. You know, so, there's a on the I'm sorry to cut you off. I was just going to say on the flip side of that, there's another, if you don't mind me saying, because I say it a lot, but there's another great Dr. Bernice Johnson Reagan quote that also speaks to this, which is, there comes a time in your life when you discover an emptiness. You have no thought. Oops, are you still there? Can you hear me? Are you still there?
I'm back.
Oh, you're there. Okay, great.
I miss.
Great. You're not gonna, whatever universe, you're not gonna cut me off on that. So here's the statement. It comes from Bernice Johnson Reagan. It says, there comes a time in your life when you discover an emptiness. You've had no thought of yourself as being empty, and you've been operating as if you were not. But it's there, this emptiness. And when you discover that emptiness, nothing hurts more than discovering that emptiness, except your yearning to be full. And that's when, for the first time in your life and the first time with your life, you search for a tongue, a language, a means of articulation. So this voice that I have now, this voice that she developed, this voice that even the world has developed on the side of justice, is really about discovering an emptiness. Comes through the pain of discovering an emptiness and knowing that we can no longer live with this pain.
And that's the resilience piece I was looking for. That with that awareness comes the quest for relief, comes the connection and joy, comes knowing that whatever comes next, it's partly the way that it's always been, but it's a new moment to have a new impact.
Absolutely right.
All right, we got a minute left, and Rosie Marinelli has a wonderful, absolutely perfect ending question. And what role do the arts play in civil rights struggles today? The answer is, and they're essential, and you must fund everything immediately.
Absolutely. And one of the things, I mean, in 1,000 ways, I think they play the same roles that they played in the civil rights movement of the 1960s. I'll let me say that, or even of the 1920s. I'll definitely say that. I unfortunately don't know anything about the civil rights movement during the transatlantic slave movement, but in terms, because there's so much unrecorded, things that happened, right? There are songs that may not have been passed down, or art that was not given to us, or words or poems probably that we did not receive and that we don't have. Some we have, but not enough. But in the recorded moments of civil rights and human liberties, I can look at just the words "Black Lives Matter" being painted in front of the Billie Holiday Theater in Brooklyn, and then of course being painted on the streets of New York, and then being painted all around the nation by artists, and it being this beautiful artistic thing, these yellow and black letters, right? That so carefully and beautifully constructed, and then people coming together in costumes and outfits to stand on those letters and put their fists up and to be photographed on those letters. I mean, that is one of the kinds of art that came out of this movement, that came out of the struggle. Certainly there's music. Not enough, I think, or rather not enough music that enters into the mainstream, I think, has come out of this particular struggle. But however, this movement was inspired by a music that preceded it, which certainly was a hip hop music, in my opinion.
Yes.
So there was already a dissidence. There was already people who were speaking about things, speaking about injustices, and they were doing it in popular music and in popular culture before we had formed the musical, before we got the memo.
Yeah, that is the perfect place to end. Carl, thank you so very much for making this time with us today. This was really a treat. And next time, invite us back, and I want a tour of your home, because it looks like there's all this inspiring stuff everywhere, and I'm dying to see it.
Yeah, lots of books, definitely. Absolutely.
All right. And good luck with what comes next for you. And I'm sure we'll follow you on the socials. I know you're busy on Instagram, and make sure that we all know what's coming next for you. Thank you for everybody for being here, and your kind attention and your fellowship and your wonderful questions, for Lincoln Center, for PNC, and for the National Center for Civil and Human Rights for inviting me to this party. And I'm going to throw it back to Cam for his final goodbyes.
Thank you both so much for being here today. That was a wonderful conversation. And again, just thank you for taking the time to really share of yourself. It was incredibly meaningful, and it was a wonderful time. Thank you, everyone who tuned in. We truly appreciate it, and we hope that you come and visit us again soon for another program. Have a wonderful day, everyone.